Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into the massive, unregulated reality of the high seas. You know, we like to think our 21st century world is completely mapped, monitored, and fully understood, right? Well, as we're about to see, the vast majority of our planet's oceans are actually shrouded in a truly surprising amount of darkness.
So, let's kick things off with a deceptively simple question. What exactly are ships doing out there in the dark? Think about it. When these massive vessels are hundreds or even thousands of miles from the nearest coastline, literally out of sight from any human policing, how do we actually know what they're up to?
To tease exactly where our investigation is heading, keep this number in the back of your mind. 75%. It is a staggering figure that represents the sheer scale of hidden activity on our oceans. By the end of this explainer, you're going to understand exactly what this number means, where it comes from, and why it completely flips how we view our global supply chains.
Part 1. The Ocean's Hidden Traffic, the Illusion of Sight. Let's start by looking at how we supposedly track ships today, and why our current view might just be a carefully crafted illusion.
At first glance, it feels like we've got a pretty solid set of eyes on the water thanks to AIS, or the Automatic Identification System. By law, ships of a certain size have to keep these transponders on, constantly pinging their real-time GPS location. It basically acts as air traffic control for the entire ocean, which is kind of ironic since we're talking about fish, but it works. And when you look at an AIS map, it's incredible. It looks like this futuristic, glowing city on the water, giving us the illusion that we know exactly who is out there at all times.
But that brings us to Part 2, when ships go dark, the AIS loophole. Because, as it turns out, there is a massive blind spot built right into this global tracking system. In practice, a ship's master can literally just press a button to turn off their AIS. It's just the flip of a switch, and we call this going dark. A typical timeline looks a bit like this. Day 1. A ship appears on the map heading toward a highly protected, biologically valuable marine area, say the Galapagos Islands. Then, on Day 2, boom, the transponder is off. They completely disappear from public view, generating this timeline of untracked, dark activity. And then, wouldn't you know it, a week later, on Day 9, they magically pop back up on the map in a completely safe, legal zone.
Now, turning off the tracker is actually perfectly legal if a ship fears for its safety. If you're sailing through an area with intense, real-world pirate activity, broadcasting your exact location is literally like handing over a treasure map, right? You absolutely wouldn't want to do that. But here's the catch. Historical data shows vessels frequently disappearing right next to valuable, protected fishing zones, places where pirates aren't exactly the main concern. They're essentially weaponizing a safety feature, creating a massive blind spot that gets exploited every single day.
Moving on to Part 3, the world's largest fleet, China's deep-sea expansion. So who exactly is operating in these shadows? When we filter the global tracking data to see where fishing vessels congregate, a very clear picture emerges. The Chinese state-subsidized fishing fleet is the largest in human history. To put this into perspective, a recent analysis estimates the single industrial fleet consists of roughly 57,000 vessels. 57,000. That is basically an entire floating industrial city. Starting back in the 80s, after depleting their own coastal stocks, the government began heavily subsidizing the building of these massive ships, pushing them deeper and deeper into international waters to meet demand.
The sheer scale of this expansion is just hard to overstate. This single fleet accounts for roughly 44% of all fishing activity on Earth. Nearly half of all global fishing is done by this one aggressively expanding fleet. And what's absolutely mind-blowing is learning that thousands of these ships will just sit millimeters outside the exclusive economic zones of other sovereign countries, waiting right on the edge of the line.
Let's compare how this actually works, because the logistical absurdity of it is fascinating. Traditional coastal fleets have a natural limit. They have to return to port to offload their catch, refuel, get fresh supplies. But this new deep-sea system relies on motherships. These are giant, factory-sized refrigerated vessels. The smaller fishing boats just pull up to the mothership in the middle of the ocean, offload their frozen fish, refuel, and take on new supplies. Because of this floating supply chain, the fishing boats, and the fishermen on them, can stay out at sea indefinitely. They literally never have to dock.
Which brings us to Part 4, the dark reality inside the ships. We really have to ask what happens to the people working on vessels that never return to shore.
When vessels operate entirely out of sight for years at a time, the human toll is devastating. Investigative reporter Ian Urbina from the Outlaw Ocean Project has spent years taking boats out into these remote, dangerous fisheries to document the brutal reality out there.
As his reporting highlights, crewmen are often trapped on these vessels completely against their will. Because the ships never have to return to port to offload, the workers are functionally imprisoned on the open ocean with nowhere to run.
The human cost of this dark activity is immense, and frankly, it's pretty tough to hear about. Workers are frequently lured in with fake job promises, only to find themselves trapped on 2-year contracts with their passports immediately confiscated. They suffer from exhaustion, violence, and extreme malnutrition in total, inescapable isolation. And the physical environment itself? Horrific. On squid vessels, for example, the panicked squid ink sprays absolutely everywhere. The decks get coated in years of slippery mucus, and since squid use ammonia for buoyancy, the ships completely reek of it. It's a brutal, squalid existence, hidden entirely from the public eye.
Part 5. Catching ships in the act, piercing the darkness. If human policing is virtually impossible out there due to the vast distances, how do we actually catch them in the act? Let's crack open our technological toolkit to see how scientists are building a new picture of the ocean. Groups like Global Fishing Watch are using a really clever combination of satellite overlays to see exactly what the AIS system misses. First, they use nightlight detections, which easily spot squid jiggers using banks of stadium-level lights so bright they can literally be seen from space. Then they use radar to detect dense, large metal objects, letting them track ships even through heavy cloud cover. Finally, high-resolution optical imagery. By layering all these separate snapshots over the blank spots on the traditional map, they can finally piece it together and pierce the darkness.
Remember that shocking 75% I asked you to keep in mind at the beginning of this explainer? Well, here it is. When researchers feed all this separate satellite data into powerful machine learning algorithms to process it globally, the jaw-dropping reality is revealed. Between 72 and 76% of all global fishing is completely untracked. 3/4 of the industrial fishing happening on our oceans is operating entirely in the dark.
So the crucial takeaway here is that going dark isn't some rare fringe crime committed by a few rogue bad actors. It's the absolute norm. The satellite data conclusively proves that when those massive clusters of ships sit right on the millimeter edge of a protected marine zone like the Galapagos and turn off their trackers, they aren't just idling. They are actively crossing inside to raid protected economic zones, grabbing as much catch as they can while completely unseen by traditional tracking.
Part 6. The true cost of seafood, the global supply chain. So why does all of this distant deep-sea activity actually matter to you?
Let's look at seafood laundering and how this invisible global traffic affects your daily life. Imagine a squid is caught illegally in the dark inside a protected zone. That catch is then offloaded onto the giant mothership, where it's immediately mixed with legal, documented catch from dozens of other vessels. At that very moment, the origin of the fish is completely washed. The mothership takes this blended catch back to shore, where it's processed in global factories, shipped across the world, and eventually served up as cheap calamari at your local restaurant. Without even knowing it, we are all participating in this untracked supply chain.
That plate of calamari comes with a massive hidden cost. When you peel back the layers, you find rampant environmental degradation. You find widespread human suffering and forced labor. You find the systematic theft of national resources from smaller, developing countries. And you find the massive, deeply unsustainable depletion of our global fish stocks. It is a staggering cost that has been deliberately hidden beneath the surface of the ocean for decades.
I'll leave you with this final thought. For the first time in human history, we actually have the machine learning and satellite technology to expose these dark zones. But knowing is really only half the battle, right? If we finally have the tools to see what's happening out there in the deep sea, is that visibility actually enough to change the tide of the massive, entrenched global seafood industry? Or will the ocean shadows continue to feed the world unseen?